My grandfather had taken a terrible fall, and I was rushing over to look after him. My daughter was the one who broke the news to me before hurrying over to his place herself. I couldn't leave right away because of a meeting with a client, so I let her go ahead, alone. But something felt off. Why hadn't my father called me directly? Why call her? I couldn't shake the creeping unease settling deep in my chest. Driven by that bad feeling, I made a decision that would change everything. I decided to show up unannounced. Standing outside by the window, the words I overheard, spoken in the cold, calculating voice of my own daughter, nearly made my knees buckle. In that single moment, everything I thought I knew about my family shattered, and that was just the beginning of a nightmare I never saw coming. I truly appreciate you being here today. Before we move forward, please leave a comment letting me know where you're watching from. It really helps get this story out to more people. Just a quick reminder, parts of this story include fictional details added for narrative and educational purposes. Any resemblance to real names or circumstances is purely coincidental, but the deeper meaning remains just as powerful. I never imagined a phone call from my daughter would lead me to the darkest betrayal of my life. But on that late Monday morning in October, as I stood behind the counter at Lawson Furniture Galleries, Lauren's voice on the other end was trembling with worry. She told me grandfather Raymond had fallen and that she was already on her way to Pinewood. My hand froze right as I was reaching for my coffee mug. The autumn sun streamed through the front windows, catching dust motes in the golden light. I asked if he was okay and if she had called an ambulance. She claimed he was conscious, just shaken up, and that he had called her instead of emergency services because of how stubborn he is. Then her voice softened as she reminded me of my appointment with the Johnsons, telling me it was a big deal and that she could handle the situation. She said she would stay with him to make sure he was all right. I let out a slow breath, guilt and relief wrestling in my chest. The Johnsons were arriving in an hour, ready to sign a $15,000 order for their lake house renovation. Running this store for 28 years had taught me that missing an appointment like this could mean losing a client for good. When I asked if she was absolutely sure, offering to reschedule, she insisted she had it under control. She told me I had done enough for him over the years and that it was her turn to help. Her words brought a sense of peace to my mind. My little girl was all grown up and taking on real responsibility. I could still picture her at 6 years old, lying on the showroom floor, using crayons to draw sofas with funny faces. Now she was 30, a marketing professional with her own downtown apartment, stepping up for the family. I told her okay, but asked her to call me when she arrived and let him know I'd be over after closing. She said she loved me. I told her I loved her too, and the line went dead. Marcus, my head sales associate, glanced over from where he was fluffing pillows on a display couch, asking if everything was good. I told him it was just my dad, and that Lauren was heading over to look after him. My father had always been the strongest man I knew. He raised me on a mail carrier's salary and taught me the value of honest work. But he was 78 now, and ever since my mother passed away 3 years ago, he seemed smaller, somehow more fragile. The thought of him alone in that house in Pinewood, a 45-minute drive away, made my stomach turn. Still, I pushed the feeling down. Lauren was there, and she would take care of him. The morning dragged on. The Johnsons arrived right at 9, well-dressed, sharp, and highly demanding. I showed them the bedroom sets and dining tables, keeping my voice steady and professional, even though my mind kept drifting north to Pinewood, to the white 2-story house on Oak Ridge Avenue where I grew up. By the time they signed the contract, it was nearly noon. I cleared my throat and tried calling Raymond, but there was no answer. I tried again. Still nothing. So I called Lauren. When she answered, her voice was bright. Almost too bright. She said grandfather was fine and resting. She mentioned she had muted his phone so he wouldn't be disturbed. When I asked to speak with him, there was a pause. It lasted only a second, but it felt entirely too long. She told me he was asleep and she didn't want to wake him. I asked if she was staying for dinner, and she said maybe, adding that she would text me later. She hung up before I could say another word. I stood in the back office, staring at my phone. Something felt off. Not necessarily wrong, just out of place. It was like a picture frame hanging slightly crooked. Hard to notice at first, but once you see it, you can't look away. My mind drifted back over the last few months. Lauren had been visiting more often, casually asking about finances, the store's revenue, and Raymond's will. At the time, I just thought she was growing up and planning for the future. But now? And then there was Evelyn, my wife of 32 years, who was spending more and more time away from home, traveling with her book club, her yoga group, and college friends. When did we stop talking? When did she start feeling like a stranger in our own home? Then came the bank statements. A few weeks ago, I noticed recurring transfers. Every Wednesday, like clockwork, $4,200 left the account. When I asked Evelyn about it, she claimed it was an automatic payment to a supplier. I accepted it without a second thought. Why wouldn't I? She had always handled the books, but what if my trust had been misplaced? By 5 o'clock, I couldn't take it anymore. I flipped the sign on the door to closed, sent Marcus and Jennifer home early, and grabbed my jacket. The drive to Pinewood would take 45 minutes, and traffic was already building up. I didn't care. I needed to see my father. I needed to see Lauren. I needed to silence that whisper in the back of my mind that kept telling me something was terribly wrong. The autumn countryside blurred past my windshield as fields gave way to stands of pine trees. The sun hung low on the horizon, a deep orange casting long shadows across the two-lane highway. I gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. When I finally pulled into Raymond's driveway, the first thing I noticed was an unfamiliar car, a sleek, expensive-looking black sedan parked next to Lauren's silver hatchback. I turned off the engine and sat in the dark for a moment, studying the house. The porch light was on. Through the living room window, I could see shadows moving back and forth. My dad's old Buick was parked in its usual spot near the garage, the dust on its hood catching the glare of the porch light. He was home, but the house felt too quiet, except for the faint sound of voices drifting through the cracked living room window. I got out of the car slowly, my boots crunching softly on the gravel. The air smelled of pine needles and wood smoke. This place was supposed to feel like home. It didn't. As I stepped onto the porch, I heard voices, low and urgent, coming through the opening. I recognized Lauren's laugh, light and careless. Then came a man's voice, deeper and entirely unfamiliar. I froze at the bottom of the porch steps, my heart pounding against my ribs. Then I heard it perfectly clear. The worry Lauren had forced into her voice on the phone that morning was completely gone. She said that once the old man was taken care of, they would have everything. The world seemed to tilt. My breath caught in my throat. I stood frozen, one hand gripping the porch railing as those words echoed in my mind. The old man? My father? Or was she talking about me? The other voice, the man, spoke with a smooth, confident tone, telling her to just wait a little longer, and then they would be set. Every instinct told me to rush inside and demand answers, but a cold, calculating survival instinct took over instead. I reached into my pocket, pulled out my phone, and with trembling fingers, opened the recording app. Keeping low, I crept closer to the window, holding the phone up near the glass. Whatever happened next, I needed proof. Lauren's voice drifted through the open window, light and casual, as if she were discussing weekend plans rather than my life. She told Tyler they needed to speed things up. She mentioned the weekly transfers were working, but it wasn't enough, and that they needed the life insurance policy. I pressed myself against the exterior wall, squeezing the phone tightly with the record button active. My pulse hammered in my ears, but I forced myself to stay completely still and keep listening. Through a gap in the curtains, I could see shadows moving in the living room. Lauren was pacing, and a man's silhouette was visible on the couch. Raymond was nowhere to be seen. The man's voice came through next, with a smooth confidence that sent a chill down my spine. He told her they had to be careful, warning that if her father found out before they changed the beneficiary, the whole plan would fall apart. He called my daughter sweetheart. Lauren laughed, a sound I had heard 1,000 times growing up. Now it sounded like shattering glass. She said he wouldn't find out, claiming her mother already had access to his documents and would forge the signature this week. My legs nearly gave out. Evelyn, my wife, was part of this. Then a third voice came through on speakerphone. It was faint, but absolutely unmistakable. It was the voice I had woken up to every morning for 32 years. She said she had the policy right there with her and told them to just let her know when they needed it. The world stopped spinning. There was only Evelyn's voice, speaking in a casual, complicit tone about my demise, as if reading off a grocery list. Then Tyler's voice asked about the old man, pointing out that Raymond was the only one who might notice something. Lauren's tone grew even colder as she told him not to worry about grandfather. She said she had been watching him and that he was getting weaker. She suggested a fall down his steep stairs or catching pneumonia this winter, saying it would look completely natural and that nobody questions a natural passing for someone near 80. Raymond. They were talking about Raymond, the father who taught me to ride a bike and showed me how to look a person in the eye with honesty. They were planning to end his life. Then it hit me. The fall. The phone call this morning wasn't real. Raymond hadn't fallen at all. This entire trip to Pinewood was just a setup to get close to him, isolate him, and lay the groundwork. My hands shook so violently I almost dropped the phone. Anger burned in my chest, hot and suffocating. But beneath the anger was something much worse. It was a hollow, crushing grief that leaves you with absolutely nothing. I wanted to kick the door down, but I didn't. Instead, I ducked lower, moved the phone closer to the window, and let the recording run. Emotions lose court cases. Evidence wins them. Tyler spoke again, saying that once they changed the insurance beneficiary and the old man was out of the picture, they would have over $1 million. He added that with the money they had already moved overseas, they could disappear if they ever needed to. Lauren sounded completely arrogant, replying that they wouldn't need to disappear because her dad trusted her completely and would never suspect a thing. Her dad trusted her completely. Those words broke something deep inside me. She knew. She knew exactly what she was doing. She knew how much I loved her, and she was using that love as a weapon. I backed away from the window, making sure every step was careful and completely silent. When I reached my car, I pulled the door open quietly, slipped inside, and closed it with the softest click. I didn't start the engine right away. I couldn't. My hands were shaking too hard. I sat there in the dark driveway, staring at the little red dot blinking on my phone screen. 3 minutes and 42 seconds. Less than 4 minutes to destroy a lifetime of trust. Finally, I stopped the recording, saved it, and backed it up to the cloud. Then I started the car, backed out of the driveway, and kept my headlights off until I hit the main road. The drive back felt completely different from the trip out. Every mile dragged on, the highway stretching out like an endless black ribbon through dark fields. My mind raced, trying to make sense of everything I had just heard. How long had they been planning this? The weekly transfers, $4,200 every Wednesday. I had been seeing them for months and never thought twice about it. How much had they already taken? And the life insurance policy. When did Evelyn get her hands on that document? By the time I pulled into my own driveway in Maple Heights, it was past 9 o'clock. The house was dark and completely still. Evelyn's car was nowhere to be seen. Good. I needed time to think. Walking inside, the faint scent of her lavender perfume lingered in the air. A scent that used to bring comfort now felt like a piece of evidence. I locked the door behind me, went straight to the study, and pulled the blinds shut. Sitting at the desk, I plugged in my headphones and played the recording again. Lauren's voice talked about needing the life insurance. Tyler warned about what would happen if her father found out. Evelyn stated she had the policy right there. I played it 3 times, 4 times, 5 times. Each time, I hoped to hear something different, but the words never changed. My daughter wanted me gone. My wife was helping her, and a man I had never met was orchestrating the whole thing. Near 11 o'clock, my phone buzzed with a text. I could barely bring myself to look at it. It was Lauren. She told me grandfather was doing fine, that she was staying the night to keep him company, and told me not to worry. A tightness gripped my throat. I stared at the words, at the casual lie wrapped in daughterly concern, and felt something shift inside me. The grief was still there, sharp and raw, but underneath it, something much harder took root. I typed out a careful reply, treating every word like a small performance. I thanked her, said I was glad she was there, and placed the phone face down on the desk. I had called her that since the day she was born. I held her hand on her first day of kindergarten, taught her how to drive, paid for her college, and this was how she repaid me. I opened my laptop and began making a list. Attorneys, private investigators, forensic accountants. I needed a team, people I could trust to help me untangle this mess without letting Lauren or Evelyn suspect a thing. I couldn't confront them. Not yet. Not until I knew the full extent of what they had done. Because if tonight taught me anything, it was that I didn't know my own family at all. I didn't sleep a wink. By the time dawn broke over Maple Heights, I had been awake for 36 hours straight, running on black coffee and pure adrenaline. James Anderson's law office didn't open until 9, but I was parked outside by 7:30. His practice was on the second floor of a brick building downtown. The stairs creaked under my weight as I walked up at 8:55. When I knocked, he answered the door himself, a tall man in his late 60s with silver hair and reading glasses perched on his nose. He welcomed me in. The office smelled of old leather and paper, with walls lined with law books and framed degrees. He pointed to a chair across from him, sat down, and calmly told me to take my time with whatever I needed to say. So I did. I played the recording, the full 3 minutes and 42 seconds. James didn't interrupt. He sat completely still, his expression shifting from calm to concern, and finally to deep gravity, as Lauren's voice filled the room. Tyler's plan unfolded, and Evelyn's involvement became undeniable. When the recording ended, a heavy silence filled the room. He asked how much they had taken. I told him I wasn't sure yet, mentioning the recurring transfers of $4,200 a week, but admitting I didn't know how long it had been going on. He made a note on his legal pad. He pointed out that this involved embezzlement, fraud, identity theft if they forged signatures, and that the conversation regarding my father amounted to conspiracy to commit harm at the very least. He looked up and told me I needed a forensic accountant to track the money and a private investigator to document their movements. Most importantly, he stressed that I absolutely could not let them know I was on to them. I told him I understood. He asked if I could look my daughter in the eye and pretend everything was normal. I thought about Lauren's text from the night before telling me not to worry. I told him I could do whatever it took. James nodded slowly. He mentioned he knew a former detective turned private investigator named Sharon Reynolds, describing her as sharp and incredibly discreet. He wrote a number on a business card, slid it across the desk, and told me to call her today, adding that he would reach out to a forensic accountant for the financial investigation. By that afternoon, I was sitting in Sharon Reynolds' office on the east side of town. It was a tight space located above a bail bond shop. File cabinets lined the walls, and a corkboard behind her desk was covered in surveillance photos and timelines drawn in red marker. Sharon herself was younger than I expected, maybe her mid-40s, with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense attitude that clearly came from years of dealing with criminals. She poured 2 cups of coffee and handed one to me. She mentioned James had filled her in and asked to hear the recording. I played it again. Her eyes narrowed at certain phrases. She paused and rewound it twice to listen closely, taking notes in a shorthand I couldn't read. When it finished, she brought up Tyler, noting I had never seen or heard of him before the previous night. I confirmed that was true. She promised to find out exactly who he was, running a full background check for any criminal record and finding his current address, saying she'd know by the weekend if he had done this before. She leaned back in her chair, noting that my daughter and wife were calculating given the overseas accounts, the insurance policy changes, and targeting my father's will. She asked if I could prove it. I told her I could document it with surveillance, financial records, and hopefully witness statements. She set her pen down and looked straight at me, warning that if they were willing to discuss my father's life like a business transaction, they were capable of far more than just theft. Her words landed heavily in my chest. When I asked if she thought they would actually go through with it, she told me I needed to be extremely careful and that my father needed protection too. I asked her how we should handle it. She told me she would arrange surveillance for his house and advised me to visit him regularly to check in, but warned me not to let Lauren know I suspected anything. I told her I would. She shook my hand and promised to call the next day with the preliminary results. She left me with one final piece of advice. Keep my routine exactly the same. Do not confront them, and do not trust anyone outside of that room. That evening, I had a video call with Andrew Peterson, the forensic accountant. He appeared on my screen, a thin man wearing wire-rimmed glasses. He told me James Anderson had given him the overview and explained that he needed access to my business accounts, personal accounts, credit cards, and any account with either my name or my wife's name on it. He planned to start by auditing the last 24 months. When I asked how long it would take, he said a week or two, but promised to have preliminary data within 72 hours. I handed over my login credentials. After the call ended, the house felt emptier than ever. My phone rang twice that night. The first was Lauren, her voice carrying a cheerful but entirely false tone. She said she was just calling to check in and asked how my day went. I told her it was fine and that the store was busy, then asked how grandfather was doing. She said he was much better and mentioned she was heading back to her own place for the night. Picturing her at Raymond's house, I hated myself for still hearing her voice the way it sounded when she was a little girl. I told her it was good to hear and told her I loved her. She said she loved me too. The second call came an hour later. Evelyn's voice sounded distant, preoccupied. She told me she was going to extend her trip by a few days because Susan wanted to drive up to Vermont. Susan was her college roommate, or perhaps it was just another lie. I told her that was fine, warned her to drive safely, and she told me she would, and that she missed me. Before I could decide whether to say it back, the line went dead. Then my phone buzzed again. It was Raymond's number. I answered on the very first ring, asking if everything was okay. His voice sounded weak and hesitant. He told me he needed to talk to me about Lauren, explaining that she had been asking about his will the previous day. He said she wanted to know who the beneficiaries were, claiming she was helping him get his affairs in order. He paused, telling me it just didn't feel right. I closed my eyes, telling him not to alter a single thing. I instructed him not to touch his will or his accounts, and promised I would come see him this weekend so we could talk. When he asked if something was wrong, I told him everything was wrong, but insisted we speak in person. I made him promise not to sign anything until we had our conversation. He gave me his word. After hanging up, I sat in the dark kitchen, realizing the full scope of the plot. They weren't just stealing my money. They were circling Raymond like vultures, preparing to forge his signature just as they had forged mine. By Thursday night, the October chill had deepened into something far more biting. I left Lawson Furniture Galleries just after 7, locking up the front door while Marcus loaded a dresser onto a customer's truck. Main Street was quiet, the shop windows glowing warmly against the encroaching darkness. I got into my sedan and started the drive home. Because the route was so familiar, my mind began to wander. I thought about Sharon's latest update, how she had identified Tyler Brooks and started building a profile on him. I thought about Andrew Peterson's preliminary data and the discrepancies in the transactions. I thought about the recording on my phone, wondering how many more secrets were waiting to surface. Riverside Drive curves along the eastern edge of Maple Heights, with old oak trees leaning over the asphalt and a dark park stretching out to the right. This stretch of road had been there since before I was born. I had driven it 1,000 times. Then the steering wheel locked completely. One second I was navigating the curve, and the next, my hands were tearing at a steering wheel that refused to budge. The car headed straight toward the guardrail. Time seemed to fracture. My foot slammed onto the brake, but momentum kept carrying me forward. Instinct took over entirely. I yanked the wheel even harder, throwing my entire body weight into it. Somewhere in the mechanics, something broke loose. Not much, just a fraction, but it was enough to shift my trajectory slightly away from the guardrail. The car sideswiped the barrier, tires shrieking. Then I went completely off the road, gravel spraying beneath the wheels. The world tilted as I plowed headfirst into a thicket of brush. Branches exploded against the windshield. The seatbelt locked painfully across my chest. My head snapped forward and bounced back violently. The car came to a stop with a massive jolt, buried halfway in thorns and splintered wood. Dead silence followed, broken only by the hissing of the radiator and my own heavy breathing. I sat there, hands still gripping the wheel, knuckles stark white. Something wet was trickling down my temple, likely blood, but I was alive. A neighbor appeared outside my window, her face contorted with worry, asking if I was all right and saying she saw me go off the road. I told her I was okay, explaining that the steering wheel had just locked up. She told me to stay still while she called emergency services. An ambulance arrived within 10 minutes, closely followed by a police cruiser. The paramedics checked me over while an officer took my statement. When he asked if the vehicle had any recent mechanical issues, I told him no, explaining it had just suddenly locked up on the curve. He mentioned that can happen with older vehicles when the steering linkage fails, glancing at my sedan and remarking that I was incredibly lucky it wasn't worse. Lucky, I nodded, but the word felt completely out of place. I called Mike's auto body for a tow and took a ride home from the neighbor, thanking her. For the rest of the night, I sat in my dark kitchen, replaying that exact moment over and over in my head. Mike called the next morning at 8. I was already awake, deep into my third cup of coffee. He told me I needed to come down to the shop, his voice carrying an urgency that made me uneasy. 20 minutes later, I arrived at the garage. Mike was standing next to my car on the lift, looking grim. When I asked what was going on, he motioned me over and pointed at the steering column. He showed me the bolts, pointing out that they had been intentionally loosened. They weren't completely unscrewed, and he noted that whoever did it was clever, backing them off just enough to hold for a while before failing under stress. My stomach turned to lead. When I asked what he meant, Mike looked me dead in the eye and told me someone had tampered with my car, stating clearly that it wasn't a mechanical failure, but a deliberate act. The garage floor seemed to tilt as I asked if he was absolutely sure. He pointed to faint scratches around the bolt heads, explaining they were fresh tool marks left very recently, perhaps a day or two ago. A day or two ago. Then it clicked. Wednesday night. Lauren had come over for dinner, claiming she missed me. We ordered pizza and watched a movie. She stayed late and asked if she could sleep in her old room. I agreed, thrilled that she wanted to spend time at home. My car had been parked on the street all night. I stepped outside and called Sharon Reynolds, informing her that my car had been sabotaged with loosened steering bolts and that I had crashed the night before. There was a pause before her sharp voice came through, asking if I was hurt or bruised. I told her nothing serious, but added that I believed Lauren did it. When she asked where I was, I told her Mike's auto body downtown, and she instructed me to stay right there while she drove over. She arrived within 15 minutes, taking photographs of the bolts and tool marks and questioning Mike. When she finished, she pulled me aside and asked when Lauren last had access to my car. I told her Wednesday night when she stayed over, noting the car was on the street and no one else could have done it. Then I thought about Evelyn, who had keys to my car and access to everything. I added that Evelyn had been away, leaving Lauren as the only one around. Sharon nodded slowly, stating that the situation had shifted from theft to attempted murder. Those words hung heavily in the cold morning air. My own daughter had tried to end my life. When I asked what I should do, she told me to keep acting completely normal, warning that I couldn't let her know I suspected anything and that I shouldn't go anywhere alone. Looking at me intently, she explained that they had escalated their timeline, meaning they were becoming desperate, and warned that I was in serious danger. I drove home in a rental car with Sharon following close behind. I spent the afternoon installing security cameras at the front door, back door, driveway, and garage. I changed every password and double-checked all the locks. By the time night fell, I was exhausted but couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. Near midnight, headlights swept across the bedroom wall. A car door slammed. I heard the front door open, followed by Evelyn's footsteps in the hallway. She slipped into the bedroom quietly, assuming I was asleep. The mattress dipped as she climbed into bed beside me. I kept my eyes closed, keeping my breathing slow and even, wondering if she knew. Did she know Lauren tried to kill me? Was she the one who told Lauren I would be late on Thursday? Or worse, did she loosen those bolts herself? Lying there just inches from the woman I had loved for 3 decades, I realized I had absolutely no idea who she really was. Saturday morning brought faint sunlight through the blinds. I had slept maybe 3 hours, spending the rest of the time watching the security feeds on my phone. Evelyn was still asleep when I locked myself in the study and booted up my laptop. The video call with Andrew Peterson was scheduled for 9. 2 cups of coffee sat on my desk, both cold. My hands were steadier than they had been in days. A cold clarity had taken root. The screen lit up at exactly 9. Andrew appeared in his cramped office, the fluorescent lighting casting a pale glow over his face, and asked if I was holding up okay. I touched the bruise on my shoulder, telling him I was alive and that we should look at the numbers. He nodded, completely professional, and stated he had completed the analysis of my accounts over the past 24 months, discovering extensive, deliberate manipulation. He shared his screen, revealing a spreadsheet with row after row of transactions highlighted in red. He directed my attention to the weekly transfers, and I leaned closer. There were 104 transactions over 2 years, occurring every Wednesday afternoon at 3 o'clock for $4,200 each. Scrolling down, he revealed that the total amount taken from my business account was $436,800. The weight of that number settled heavily on my chest. Nearly $500,000 was gone. He explained where the money went, pointing out an intermediary account named the Lawson Family Trust. He noted the trust did not legally exist and was merely a shell, used to funnel the funds into an offshore account in the Cayman Islands within 48 hours. I made a note of it. My own name had been used to rob me. Andrew adjusted his glasses and added that wasn't all, revealing that a home equity loan against my property had been approved in May for $125,000. My stomach churned as I told him I never applied for a home equity loan. He acknowledged that explaining the application was submitted online using my social security number and forged documentation. When I asked where that money went, he revealed it was deposited into an account under Lauren Lawson's name and withdrawn in increments over the next 2 weeks in untraceable cash and transfers. I closed my eyes at the mention of my daughter's account. Andrew lowered his voice, telling me there was more. I opened my eyes. He explained that in August, $21,800 was transferred from my savings to an entity called Brooks Business Ventures, LLC. He noted the transfer was authorized using my credentials, likely handled by Evelyn, and explained that Brooks Business Ventures was a shell company registered under Tyler Brooks, simply a bank account used to take my money and move it elsewhere. I wrote it down, anger seeping into my handwriting, and asked for the total. Andrew pulled up another document, stating the combined theft amounted to $583,600, over $500,000. How does someone steal that much without being noticed? Slowly, patiently, week after week, with an inside hand. Andrew's voice dropped even lower as he brought up my life insurance policy. I froze. He revealed the beneficiary had been changed on September 15th. Previously, Evelyn was listed as the primary beneficiary, but as of September, Lauren was now the sole beneficiary of a policy worth $1,100,000. Something fractured inside me, a silent crack. He explained the change was processed online with a digital signature, following the exact same forgery pattern as the loan documents. He pointed out that if anything happened to me, Lauren stood to collect over $1 million. I stared at the screen, the weekly theft, the forged loan, the fake investment, and finally, the life insurance. She had been laying the groundwork to profit from my death. Thursday night, when the steering wheel locked, wasn't an accident. It was an execution attempt. Andrew's voice broke through the screen, asking if I was still there. I told him I was. He stressed that this was more than enough to involve law enforcement, listing fraud, embezzlement, identity theft, and forgery, combined with the vehicle tampering, as plenty of ground to pursue attempted murder charges. I told him not yet, explaining that I needed to know everyone involved and see the complete picture. Looking him in the eye through the screen, I asked if he could have a full forensic report ready by next week. He confirmed he could, but warned about the danger if they tried again. I told him I would be careful, noting that Sharon already had eyes on the house. The call ended, leaving me staring at my notes in the silent office. Then I heard footsteps in the hall, followed by a soft knock and Evelyn's voice telling me breakfast was ready. I saved the files, closed the laptop, and opened the door. She stood in the hallway in her bathrobe, a smile on her face that didn't reach her eyes, noting I had been in there all morning and asking if everything was okay. I told her I was just catching up on some work. She touched my arm, expressing relief that I was all right, and claiming she was terrified when I called about the crash. Terrified. I wanted to ask if she was terrified because I survived, but I simply smiled, telling her I was fine and just a bit shaken up. Downstairs, she made eggs and toast, and we ate in near silence. She asked about the car, and I told her it was totaled and that I had a rental. She nodded, mentioning something about insurance handling it. I watched her, trying to pinpoint exactly when she stopped being the woman I married. Sunday afternoon, Lauren showed up. I was in the living room when her car pulled into the driveway. Evelyn let her in, and Lauren walked straight toward me, expressing distress over the crash and asking if I was okay. Before I could answer, she wrapped her arms around me. I held her back, feeling her heartbeat against my chest. I told her I was fine, just a little banged up. She stepped back to look at my face, asking what happened. I explained that the steering failed on the riverside curve and I lost control. She remarked that it was terrifying and that I could have been killed. Yes, I could have died, and she knew that perfectly well when she loosened those bolts. I told her I got lucky. She sat beside me, placing her hand over mine, telling me I needed to be more careful because she was worried about me. Looking into her eyes, all I saw was a calculated performance. If I hadn't heard that recording or seen the financial evidence, I might have believed her. She stayed for an hour, talking about work and holiday plans, things a normal daughter would discuss. When she finally left, she hugged me at the door, claiming she was so glad I was safe and that she didn't know what she would do without me. I held her tight, the lie between us feeling like a blade, and told her I loved her. She said she loved me too. I watched her drive away, then went inside, locked the door, and stood in the quiet entryway. I thought about her words, claiming she didn't know what she would do without me. But she did know. She had it all planned out. My life was stamped with a price tag of $1,100,000, plus whatever was left of the money she had already stolen. I would give them enough rope to think they succeeded, and when they made their move, I would be ready. But first, I had to survive whatever came next. Monday afternoons usually brought a steady stream of customers to Lawson Furniture Galleries. I returned to work that morning, the bruise on my shoulder still tender. I told Marcus and Jennifer the crash was just an accident. Keeping up the daily routine felt far safer than sitting at home watching Evelyn walk through the house like a stranger. Around 2 o'clock, a woman in her late 60s approached me near the display sofas, asking if we had any more of the ceramic table lamps with the cream-colored shades. I smiled, telling her we kept some extra stock in the mezzanine loft and offering to go check for her. The mezzanine was accessible by a metal ladder bolted to the back wall. I had climbed it 2 or 3 times a day for years. 10 rungs up, 10 rungs down. It was as natural as breathing. I grabbed the sides and began to climb, reaching the 7th rung. As I shifted my weight to reach for the 8th, the rung beneath my feet gave way completely. 1 second it was solid. The next, it was gone. I pitched backward into midair, my hands clawing at handrails that were suddenly out of reach. Then something caught me. A pair of strong arms cushioned my descent before my head could strike the hardwood floor. I slammed hard into Marcus, and we both staggered, crashing to the ground together in a controlled collapse. An elbow caught my ribs, sending a sharp jab of pain through my chest, but it would have been far worse without him there. Marcus asked if I was okay, his voice breathless. I rolled off him and sat up with shaking hands, telling him I was fine. Jennifer ran over, her face pale, while the customer stood frozen with her hand over her mouth, asking what happened. I looked up at the ladder. The 7th rung was dangling loosely, attached at one end and hanging at a sickening angle. I pointed out that the rung had just snapped right off. Jennifer noted it was a 10-foot drop, remarking that I could have broken my neck. Marcus approached the ladder, stating that something wasn't right because the ladder was steel, and we had just checked it 6 months ago. He looked at me and said he was going to take a look. He brought over a stepladder to inspect the broken rung. I watched his fingers trace the metal, his brow furrowing deeply before he called me over to take a look. I climbed up to stand beside him, and Marcus pointed to the bolt holes. He showed me the fresh tool marks around the bolt heads, explaining that someone had used a wrench to back the bolts out, just enough to hold for a little while before failing under weight. The floor seemed to tilt again, not twice in 1 week. I asked if he was sure. Marcus looked me in the eye, stating he had worked 15 years in construction and knew what tampering looked like, concluding that someone did this on purpose. I climbed down slowly and asked when the last time someone else had been up there was. Marcus thought for a moment, recalling that it was yesterday, Sunday, when my daughter came by. He remembered her asking to see the new inventory, and noted he told her the lamps were on the mezzanine, so she went up to look. Lauren. Sunday afternoon, less than 24 hours ago. When I asked how long she was up there, he estimated about 15 minutes, noting she came down saying she didn't see anything she liked. 15 minutes. Plenty of time to loosen the bolts on a ladder her father climbed multiple times a day. I pulled out my phone and called Sharon Reynolds, telling her another incident had occurred at the store involving a tampered ladder and that I had nearly fallen. She asked if I was hurt. I told her no, explaining that Marcus caught me, but added that it was Lauren, noting she had been there the day before. Sharon instructed me not to touch anything and said she was on her way. She arrived within 30 minutes with a camera and an evidence kit. Marcus gave his statement and pointed out the tool marks, which she photographed from every angle. When she finished, she pulled me aside. She noted this matched the pattern with my car, but pointed out that this time there was a witness, adding that this time she made a mistake. When I asked what mistake, Sharon pulled up her phone, showing me a photograph of a receipt from Riverside Hardware dated the previous Tuesday for a 12-piece wrench, set costing $63 and change. At the bottom was a signature, Lauren Lawson. Sharon explained she had been tracking her movements since the crash, noting she bought the wrenches a week ago and stating that the tool marks on the ladder matched the size of that set perfectly. I stared at the receipt, at my daughter's cursive signature. She bought the tools, used them to sabotage my car, and used them again on the ladder. I wondered how many times she was going to try. Sharon's eyes were steady as she stated she would keep trying until she succeeded, or until we stopped her. I told her I wanted her arrested, but not yet. Sharon agreed, explaining that they were building an attempted murder case, which required proving intent and a pattern. She noted the 2 incidents gave them the pattern, but warned that if they moved now, her attorney would argue it was a coincidence, stressing that they needed more evidence. When I expressed frustration that she had already tried to kill me twice, Sharon acknowledged the danger but insisted they had to be smart, resolving to document everything, keep me safe, and wait for a move that would connect her directly without any shadow of a doubt. By evening, Marcus walked me to my rental car, using a flashlight to check the wheel wells and undercarriage before letting me get in, telling me to call him if I needed anything. I thanked him for catching me. I drove slowly, constantly checking my rearview mirror. The house was completely dark when I arrived. Evelyn had left a note saying she was out with Diane and would be late. I stood in the kitchen reading that note 3 times, wondering if she was actually with her sister or somewhere with Lauren planning the next attempt. My phone vibrated with a text from Sharon showing a zoomed-in image of Lauren's signature on that hardware receipt. I stared at it until my vision blurred. My daughter's handwriting, my daughter's choice. Tuesday morning, I sat across from Sharon Reynolds in her cramped office, staring at a folder as thick as a phone book. Outside, Maple Heights was waking up to a gray November morning, but none of that mattered because Sharon had found him. She opened the folder, introducing him as Tyler James Brooks, and revealed a driver's license photo showing a practiced, handsome look with well-groomed dark hair and a smile meant to charm anyone. She noted he was 35, born in Erie, Pennsylvania, and stated he was exactly what they suspected. I leaned forward, my ribs still aching, and asked for details. She slid a document across the desk, revealing an arrest record from 2018 in Philadelphia for wire fraud and identity theft. He had posed as a financial advisor and cleared out the retirement savings of 3 elderly women. He was sentenced to 2 years, served 14 months, and was released in 2019 for good behavior. He was a professional con man. She added that he moved here in the summer of 2020, kept his official record clean, and according to Lauren's social media, started dating her about 8 months ago. 8 months, long enough to worm his way into her life, win her trust, and twist her mind. Sharon pulled out another set of documents, noting that the interesting part was that Tyler Brooks wasn't just a con man, but a family man as well. I placed the gift bag on the coffee table, mentioning I brought something so we could raise a glass to my mother's memory, and pulled out the safe bottle of scotch. Raymond brought 4 glasses from the kitchen, and I poured a generous amount into each. I raised my glass, offering a toast to Mildred, describing her as the strongest woman I knew, noting she taught me that family is everything, and that the truth always comes to light. Raymond raised his glass with tears already in his eyes, echoing the toast. Lauren raised hers too, her smile stiffening as she toasted her grandmother. I took a large drink, the scotch burning cleanly down my throat. Raymond drank too. I watched Lauren and Tyler closely. Lauren brought the glass to her lips, but set it down without letting it touch. Tyler did the same, a complete pantomime of drinking without swallowing a drop. They knew it was poisoned. They were waiting for me to fade. 10 minutes passed. We talked about trivial things, the weather, Raymond's health, Lauren's job. It was a completely normal conversation, except I kept watching Lauren and Tyler, staring at me, waiting for the expected symptoms to start. Finally, I intentionally let my eyes unfocus and brought my hand to my temple, stating I wasn't feeling well. Raymond looked over with concern, asking if I was okay. I claimed I was just dizzy, standing up and swaying deliberately before sinking heavily back into my chair, stating something was wrong. Lauren stood up immediately, asking what was wrong. I closed my eyes and let my head fall back, claiming I couldn't breathe. Raymond's voice rose in panic, asking if he should call emergency services. Tyler spoke up, his tone entirely too calm, suggesting they give it a minute and claiming it might just be a panic attack. He was stalling, waiting for the poison to finish the job. Raymond called out for me to hang on, demanding Tyler call an ambulance, but Tyler moved away from his phone instead of toward it, repeating that they should give it a minute. Then the front door burst open. Sharon and 2 men in paramedic uniforms rushed in, announcing they had received a call about a medical emergency. Everyone took a step back, and Raymond looked confused, stating he hadn't called anyone. Sharon was already by my side. She leaned in close, whispering for me to do it now. I opened my eyes, sat straight up, and looked directly at Lauren, telling her I hadn't drunk enough. Her face turned stark white as she gasped. I repeated that I hadn't drunk enough, standing up completely steady. I told her I knew exactly what she had done, and that I knew about the poison. Tyler started backing toward the door, but Detective Palmer stepped inside, flashing his badge and ordering Tyler Brooks not to move. Raymond looked from me to Lauren, then to Tyler, his expression shifting from confusion to pure horror as he asked what was happening. I kept my eyes locked on Lauren, stating that someone had been trying to kill me for the past 3 weeks. I listed the sabotaged car, the tampered ladder at my store that nearly broke my neck, and pointed toward the kitchen, stating that the previous Wednesday night, someone had laced this scotch with enough sedatives to cause respiratory failure. I picked up the bottle, explaining it wasn't the original because we had switched it, but stated we had the laced bottle in our possession, confirming it had been tested and carried her fingerprints. Lauren shook her head, backing away toward Tyler, trying to deny it. I told her I understood completely, stating that she and Tyler had been stealing from me for 2 years, taking over $500,000. I explained they had forged loan documents and changed my life insurance beneficiary to her name, and when that wasn't enough, they tried to kill me to collect the payout. Sharon pulled out her phone, holding up a photograph, noting they had the receipt for the wrenches, the surveillance footage, and the text messages detailing the plan to eliminate her father from Tyler's burner phone. Tyler tried to run, but Palmer and the other officer grabbed him, slamming him against the wall and declaring he was under arrest. I raised my hand and told them to wait, stating it wasn't time yet. Everyone froze. I explained that I wanted them to attend the memorial dinner tonight, to face the entire family, stating they owed my mother that much. When someone protested, I insisted everyone needed to know, stating I wanted Patricia, David, and Emma to see what they had done. Detective Palmer and Sharon exchanged a look, and Palmer agreed, but insisted on keeping them under tight surveillance. I turned to Lauren, telling her there was one more thing she should know about Tyler. She was crying now, asking what it was. Sharon held up another photograph showing the auburn-haired woman holding the little boy's hand. She identified her as Melissa Brooks, Tyler's wife of 8 years, and pointed out their 6-year-old son, Oliver. She explained that Tyler was never separated, never intended to get a divorce, and had been lying to her from the very beginning. Lauren's legs gave out, and she collapsed onto the sofa, staring at the photo in disbelief, stammering that he had promised otherwise. I told her flatly that he had lied, explaining he used her to get to my money, and would have disappeared the moment she was no longer useful. They led Lauren and Tyler outside in zip ties, loading them into an unmarked vehicle. Sharon stayed behind, helping Raymond into a chair and explaining everything that had unfolded. Raymond placed a hand on my shoulder, his voice thick as he told me how sorry he was. I looked at him, the father who taught me to be honest and strong. Tonight, in front of 17 people, I would have to replay this nightmare one more time. But it would be the last time. Tonight, justice would be served. The sun went down behind the Pinewood Hills, and the house was packed. Oak Ridge Avenue was lined with cars, just like the day we buried my mother 3 years ago. Sedans and SUVs sat bumper to bumper, their headlights cutting through the November dusk. I stood by the door at my father's house, watching them walk in. First came Patricia, my sister, gripping her husband Michael's arm with a face full of worry. Next was David, my brother, his jaw set with that familiar stubbornness. Rebecca followed with their daughter, Emma. Then Stephen and Diane Carter, old family friends who had known my mother since college, and George Whitman, my dad's fishing buddy, leaning heavily on his cane. Margaret Foster, who taught Sunday school with Mom for 20 years, arrived next. Then came the 3 outsiders I had invited. Detective Palmer was introduced as Tom, a distant cousin from Ohio. Sharon Reynolds played Sarah, an old college friend. Officer Jenkins was introduced as Dan, a neighbor from Maple Heights, who wanted to pay his respects. 17 people in total, 17 witnesses. The dining room was warmly lit. My father had set the long oak table with my mother's best china, the set with the delicate blue flowers that she only used for holidays. The mantel was crowded with framed photos of her on her wedding day, holding me as a newborn and laughing at some long-forgotten joke. The air smelled of roasted chicken and rosemary, though I doubted anyone would have much of an appetite tonight. Lauren sat at the far end of the table with Tyler next to her. She was pale, her hands folded in her lap, fingers twisting her napkin over and over. Tyler's face was a mask of calm, almost bored, but I caught his eyes tracking Sharon as she moved around the room. He knew something was wrong. He just didn't know how bad it was. Evelyn sat opposite them, her face deliberately blank. She had barely spoken to me since this morning, never asking how I recovered so quickly from my episode, never questioning why I insisted on this dinner. She knew, I was certain of it now. She knew about the money, maybe even the forged signatures. The only question left was whether she knew about the 3 attempts on my life. By 7 o'clock, everyone was seated. Raymond stood at the head of the table, his hands gripping the back of his chair. He looked older tonight, the lines in his face deeper, his shoulders slumped. When he spoke, his voice was thick. He thanked everyone for coming, noting that we lost Mildred 3 years ago. He described her as the heart of the family, stating there wasn't a day he didn't miss her, before pausing and taking a difficult breath. He explained that we were gathering tonight to honor her memory, but also to face some hard truths as a family. He sat down heavily and looked at me. The room went completely still. I stood up slowly, my chair scraping against the hardwood floor as every eye turned toward me. Patricia looked worried, David confused, Emma anxious, and Margaret wiped her eyes with a tissue. Lauren stared straight down at her plate, her jaw clamped so tight I could see the muscle twitching. I began by stating that my mother believed in honesty, noting she always said a family built on lies would crumble from within, and reminded everyone that she taught us to value integrity above all else. Pausing to let the words settle, I explained that in her honor tonight, I was going to tell the truth about what had been happening in this family over the past 2 years. Forks hovered in midair and napkins froze as the silence stretched thin. I continued, announcing that 24 months ago someone began stealing my money. I explained that $4,200 was being transferred out of my business account every single week, totaling 104 transactions and over $500,000. I let the number hang in the air as Patricia gasped and David's fork clattered against his plate. I confirmed the exact figure was $550,000. Evelyn started to speak my name, but I raised my hand to cut her off. I explained the money was moved through a fake trust account before being funneled into offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands, stating the transfers were authorized with forged signatures of my name. Pulling a folder from beneath my chair and placing it on the table, I announced I had the bank statements, forensic analysis, and the paper trail. Raymond's face turned gray, George Whitman's mouth hung open, and Margaret pressed her tissue to her lips. I turned my head to look directly at my daughter. I stated calmly that Lauren was the one who stole the money, pointing out she did it alongside Tyler Brooks sitting next to her. Her head snapped up with panic in her eyes as she stammered that she could explain. I cut her off, asking if she could explain the 3 attempts to end my life. My voice grew louder and firmer as I listed the car crash 2 weeks ago when the steering column bolts were loosened, the tampered ladder at my store that nearly broke my neck, and pointed toward the kitchen, stating she had laced the scotch with enough benzodiazepines to end my life the previous Wednesday night. The room erupted. Patricia screamed. David bolted to his feet. Emma burst into tears, and Evelyn's face went white as snow. Raymond made a sound like a wounded animal. Lauren stood up, her chair flying backward, her face twisted with rage and desperation as she shouted that they didn't understand, crying out that Tyler loved her and had promised they would be together. For a long moment, I just looked at her, my 30-year-old daughter, standing before 17 witnesses with shaking hands, holding up Tyler Brooks's love as a shield. I told her calmly to sit down. The room held its breath. Lauren swayed, her eyes darting to Tyler as if expecting him to save her, but Tyler sat frozen like a statue with a blank face. Officer Jenkins had already moved closer, blocking the exit. I repeated the command to sit. She collapsed into her chair, and I reached beneath the table, pulling out 17 manila folders stuffed with thick documents and distributing them to everyone. Patricia opened hers with trembling hands. David's face turned to stone, and Emma covered her mouth. I explained that these contained the bank statements, showing 2 years of transfers, noting that every Wednesday at 2:47, $4,200 left my business account for an offshore account controlled by Lauren and Tyler Brooks. Patricia looked up pale, noting it was $500,000, and I confirmed it was $550,000, adding that wasn't all. Turning to the second tab, I revealed that a home equity loan had been taken out against my house last May for $125,000, using a forged signature of my name, noting the money went directly into Lauren's personal account. Lauren choked out a plea for me to stop. I continued, explaining that last September, the beneficiary on my life insurance policy was changed to Lauren Lawson for $1,100,000, using a forged signature. Looking at my daughter, I stated that was when I knew this was no longer just theft, but a plot to eliminate me. The word resonated heavily, drawing a sharp gasp from Margaret Foster, while Emma cried harder. I detailed the 3 attempts, explaining the first occurred 2 weeks ago when someone loosened the steering column bolts while my car was parked outside. Turning to Lauren, I noted she had stayed at my house the night before and had the opportunity. I pulled out a photo showing the mechanic's report and a close-up of the tampering, stating the car nearly went off the road and that I would be dead if I hadn't reacted in time. Patricia covered her mouth with her hand. I detailed the second attempt at my store a week ago, pulling out photos of the broken ladder and loosened bolts. I explained that the seventh rung gave way while I was carrying a 40-pound lamp, noting my assistant Marcus caught me. Otherwise, I would have dropped 18 feet onto concrete. Looking around the table, I pointed out that Lauren had visited the store the day before and spent 15 minutes alone in the mezzanine. Gaining emphasis, I stated the third attempt occurred 3 days ago when someone broke into my house and poisoned the scotch. I motioned to Sharon, who produced a sealed evidence bag. As I explained, it contained enough benzodiazepines mixed with alcohol to cause respiratory failure. Looking straight at Lauren, I revealed that surveillance caught her entering my house at 11:47 at night, walking to my liquor cabinet, and leaving 12 minutes later. A suffocating silence followed as Emma wept openly. Shuju, I asked her why, after 32 years together, she would betray me. She was silent for a long time before admitting she was scared of growing old and becoming irrelevant. Explaining Lauren made her feel needed by confiding in her and asking for help. Looking at me with bloodshot eyes, she stated she was stupid and selfish and would never forgive herself. I stood up, stating I hoped that was true. I told her that if she took the stand, she should tell them everything, suggesting it might help her sleep at night, and walked out without waiting for a reply. That week, I fulfilled my promise to Melissa Brooks. I established an educational fund for Oliver, contributing $50,000 toward his future tuition. I helped Melissa with her divorce paperwork and filed for a restraining order against Tyler. She called to tell me I didn't have to do that, but I insisted, stating Oliver was innocent in all of this and deserved a chance. The media attention was relentless, with reporters stationed outside my house, my store, and Raymond's place. I refused all interviews, issuing only a brief statement describing it as a private family matter and requesting privacy while we pursued justice. A week after the arrests, I started seeing a therapist, Dr. Susan Campbell, who helped me process the guilt, anger, and exhaustion. During one session, she emphasized that I didn't drive her to steal or try to end my life, stating clearly that those were her choices, not mine. I admitted I had wanted to believe her. Raymond's health took a hit from the stress, triggering a minor cardiac issue in late November that put him in the hospital for 3 days. I stayed with him the following week, cooking and helping around the house. One evening, he told me he was proud of me and that I did the right thing, adding that my mother would be proud of me too. I told him I hoped so. Patricia and David called regularly to check in, and we started having Sunday family dinners at Patricia's house. Just the siblings, trying to rebuild a sense of normalcy. Life was slowly and painfully returning to a functioning routine. By mid-December, I was back to work at Lawson Furniture Galleries. Marcus and Jennifer were incredibly supportive and respectful, never prying. Business was quiet at first, but the community gradually rallied around me, and sales picked up again. A few nights before the trial was set to begin, I came home to a letter from the county jail. The handwriting was shaky, like a child's. It was from Lauren, stating she knew I hated her, and that she hated herself too. She wrote that she needed me to know she never stopped loving me, but admitted she loved the idea of freedom more, explaining Tyler promised her a life she thought she deserved. She wrote that she now realized how wrong she was, adding she wasn't asking for forgiveness, but wanted me to know she was sorry. I read it 3 times, folded it carefully, and put it in a drawer without replying. Some apologies come entirely too late. December 15th, 2025. The courthouse in downtown Maple Heights was an imposing structure of gray stone and towering windows. I stood at the bottom of the steps as camera flashes went off around me and reporters shouted questions I ignored. Behind me, James Anderson placed a steady hand on my shoulder, asking if I was ready. Taking a deep breath of the freezing December air, I told him, "Let's finish this." The courtroom was packed with family, media, and curious locals. Judge Margaret Thornton presided. A woman in her early 60s, with iron gray hair and a reputation for running a strict courtroom. Lauren sat at the defense table on the left, wearing a navy blue blouse, her hair pulled back, looking pale and thin. She looked so young, almost like a child. Sitting beside her was her public defender, Sarah Montgomery. Tyler sat at the other defense table in a dark suit, likely paid for with my stolen funds. His attorney, Dennis Harper, was a high-priced criminal defense lawyer. Tyler looked calm, almost detached. I sat in the front row behind the prosecution, flanked by James and Sharon, with my father gripping my hand beside me. Patricia and David sat behind us, what was left of the family. Jury selection had taken 2 full days, resulting in 12 jurors and 2 alternates of varying ages and backgrounds, carefully vetted by both sides. Judge Thornton rapped her gavel, calling the court to order for the case of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania versus Lauren Lawson and Tyler Brooks, and announced they would proceed with opening statements. District Attorney Robert Mitchell stood and faced the jury box, stating this was a case of greed, manipulation, and the ultimate betrayal, a daughter and her lover plotting to eliminate her father for money. Pausing, he promised they would see evidence of 24 months of systematic theft, forged documents, offshore bank accounts, and shell companies designed to hide $580,000. He detailed the 3 orchestrated attempts on my life involving a sabotaged car, a tampered ladder, and poisoned scotch, pointing to the evidence table and declaring the intent was undeniable, demanding accountability. Sarah Montgomery then stood, taking a softer approach with the jury. Pointing to Lauren, she acknowledged her client made terrible choices but argued Lauren Lawson was not a killer. Instead, she described her as a victim of Tyler Brooks, a predator who manipulated and exploited her. She argued Lauren loved the wrong person and trusted him, stating he used that trust to control and coerce her into actions she would never commit on her own. While admitting her involvement in the theft, she argued she was no killer, but a heartbroken young woman deserving of sympathy rather than condemnation. Dennis Harper stood up, adjusting his cufflinks. He addressed the jury, suggesting that the prosecution wanted them to believe his client was a monster, but questioned where the direct evidence was. He argued that text messages could be misinterpreted and financial transactions could be explained. He stated that his client fell in love with Lauren Lawson, which was no crime. Pointing directly at me, he claimed I was an angry man, furious that my daughter chose independence over obedience. He concluded that there was reasonable doubt in this case, and that doubt demanded a verdict of not guilty. The first 3 days of the trial focused heavily on financial evidence. Andrew Peterson took the stand, guiding the jury through every transaction, transfer, shell company, and offshore account from the past 24 months. He stated flatly that it was no accident, describing it as a deliberate, sophisticated conspiracy designed to steal and hide funds. Representatives from the bank also testified, confirming the signatures on the loan documents were forged, and a bank clerk identified Lauren's handwriting on the deposit slips. On the 4th day, I took the stand. Robert Mitchell guided me through the timeline, recounting how I discovered the first transfer, assembled the investigation team, and uncovered the full scope of the theft. During cross-examination, Dennis Harper challenged me, asking if it wasn't true that I was controlling with my daughter. I told him no, explaining that I loved her completely and trusted her completely, stating it was that very trust that had been betrayed. When he countered that I was angry when I found out about Tyler, I replied that I was heartbroken, adding that my anger didn't forge documents or steal $500,000. The 5th and 6th days focused on the attempts against my life. My mechanic, Mike, testified, presenting photographs of the loosened steering components. He stated decisively that after 30 years as a mechanic, he knew this was deliberate sabotage. Marcus took the stand next, describing the incident with the ladder and presenting photos of the tool marks on the bolts. He pointed out that she was the only non-employee near the ladder that day, adding that the marks left on the bolts matched the wrench set she bought at Riverside Hardware, noting they had the receipt. A lab technician testified regarding the sedatives found in the scotch bottle, explaining why the dosage would have been fatal. Then I took the stand again, recounting the events of November 18th, the morning I drank from the dummy bottle, staged a reaction, and watched Lauren and Tyler stand before me doing absolutely nothing. My voice cracked as I told the jury that she didn't call 911, stating she just stood there watching me, waiting for me to fade away. The courtroom fell completely silent. On the 8th day, Lauren took the stand. Sarah Montgomery gently guided her testimony. Lauren wept, her voice trembling as she described how she fell for Tyler and trusted him. Wiping away tears, she claimed he told her my father was withholding money from her, telling her she deserved more. She added that he told her they could be together if her father was no longer around, calling herself stupid and admitting she loved him. She claimed Tyler acted alone when it came to sabotaging the car and the ladder, insisting she was only involved in the financial theft. Then Robert Mitchell stood up for cross-examination, asking if she bought the wrenches used to tamper with the ladder. Lauren hesitated, claiming Tyler asked her to buy them and that she didn't know why. He then asked if she put the sedatives in her father's scotch bottle. After another pause, she claimed Tyler gave her the pills, stating he told her it would only make her father sleep. Mitchell spoke deliberately, asking if she really expected the jury to believe that a fatal dose of sedatives was just meant to make him sleep so they could talk. Lauren broke down into heavy sobs, crying out that she didn't know what she was thinking and wasn't reasoning clearly. The judge called a recess. On the 9th day, Tyler Brooks took the stand. He was confident and smooth, smiling at the jury with a charming, disarming demeanor. He claimed he loved Lauren, but insisted he never intended to hurt anyone, arguing that Mr. Lawson fabricated the entire plot because he couldn't accept his daughter's independence. Then District Attorney Robert Mitchell stood up holding a document. He spoke calmly, bringing up a text message Tyler sent to Lauren Lawson on November 3rd at 11:47 p.m. Reading from the paper, he quoted Tyler saying that once the old man was gone, they would be set for life, and asked him to explain what he meant by those words. Tyler's face turned stark white instantly. He opened his mouth but couldn't make a sound. Mitchell told him to take his time. I knew right then that we had him cornered. December 22nd, 2025. The jury had been deliberating for a day. I sat in the hallway outside courtroom 4B, hands clasped between my knees, staring at the marble floor. Patricia sat beside me, her hand over mine, while Raymond leaned against the wall, looking weaker than I had ever seen him. David paced back and forth in the corridor. The waiting was suffocating. Then the doors opened and the bailiff stepped out, announcing the jury had reached a verdict. My heart stopped. This was it. We filed back into the packed courtroom. Tyler sat at his table with a tight jaw, while Lauren looked pale, her eyes red and swollen. Judge Thornton entered, and everyone rose before taking their seats. She asked the jury foreperson if they had reached a verdict, and a middle-aged man in a blue shirt stood up, confirming they had. She asked for their verdict regarding the first count of attempted first-degree murder in the case of the Commonwealth versus Tyler Brooks, and he declared him guilty. The word resonated like thunder. She asked about the second count, and he repeated guilty. She asked about the third count, and he said guilty once more. Tyler's face went entirely pale. When she asked about conspiracy to commit murder, fraud, embezzlement, and identity theft, the foreperson confirmed he was guilty on all counts. A wave of sound washed over the courtroom. I closed my eyes and let out a long breath, thanking God. Judge Thornton continued, asking for the verdict regarding the first count of attempted first-degree murder in the case of the Commonwealth versus Lauren Lawson. The foreperson looked at Lauren and declared her guilty. Lauren let out a broken, low moan. The foreperson repeated the guilty verdict for the second and third counts, and when asked about conspiracy to commit murder, fraud, embezzlement, and identity theft, he confirmed she was guilty on all counts. Lauren collapsed forward, weeping uncontrollably as Sarah Montgomery put an arm around her. I felt no joy, only a deep, aching sorrow. Judge Thornton rapped her gavel, stating the defendants would remain remanded in custody while awaiting sentencing, and announced the court would reconvene in an hour for victim impact statements and formal sentencing. An hour later, I stood at the podium. I looked first at Lauren, then at Tyler. I addressed Lauren, stating she was my daughter, that I raised her, and that I loved her, pointing out she had tried to end my life 3 times. Pausing, I noted it wasn't for survival or safety, but for money, greed, and a man who had been lying to her from the very start. Lauren sobbed quietly. I turned to Tyler, stating he preyed on my family and manipulated my daughter, describing him as a predator who fully deserved everything coming his way. Taking a deep breath, I stated that I forgave both of them, not for their sakes, but for my own, explaining that holding on to hatred would mean letting them win. However, I emphasized that forgiveness did not mean escaping the consequences, stating they both deserved to serve every single year of their upcoming sentences. Lauren looked up through her tears, telling me she was sorry. I told her calmly that I knew, but added that an apology couldn't undo what she had done. I sat down in a completely silent courtroom. Judge Thornton looked at Tyler, describing him as a thief, a manipulator, and an attempted killer whose prior record showed a clear pattern of exploiting vulnerability for financial gain. She sentenced him to 24 years in state prison, noting he would not be eligible for parole for 20 years. Tyler bolted upright, shouting that it was ridiculous, but Judge Thornton calmly ordered him to sit down as the bailiffs removed him from the room, his voice echoing down the hall. She then turned to Lauren, acknowledging the court recognized she was manipulated by Mr. Brooks. However, she emphasized that Lauren was an adult who made conscious, repeated choices to steal from her father and attempt to harm him, sentencing her to 18 years in state prison with parole eligibility after 15 years. Lauren's sobs turned into a wail as she pleaded with me, crying out that she loved me. I sat there frozen, tears running down my cheeks, unable to speak as the bailiffs led her away. Lauren cast one last pale, desperate look back at me, and I turned my face away. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. I issued a brief statement, declaring that justice had been served today, and expressing hope that others could learn from this tragedy. I advise people to trust, but verify, protect their assets, and intervene before it's too late, if they see signs of manipulation in someone they love. James led me away before they could ask more questions. That evening, we gathered at Patricia's house. Raymond, Patricia, Michael, David, Rebecca, Emma, James, and Sharon. There was no celebration, just quiet relief and exhaustion. When Patricia asked what I planned to do now, I told her I would rebuild the store, my life, and myself. 2 days later, I drove to the Maple County Jail. Lauren was being transferred to a state facility upstate the following week, and this would be my last opportunity. They brought me into a visitation room with gray walls, metal chairs, and a glass partition separating us with a phone. I sat down to wait. Lauren appeared on the other side wearing an orange jumpsuit, her hair limp and unwashed. She picked up the receiver and I did the same. She whispered that I came, and I told her I needed to see her one last time to say goodbye. Her face fell as she claimed she knew I hated her. I told her I didn't hate her, explaining I hated what she did, noting there was a difference. When she asked if I would ever forgive her, I told her I already had, but clarified that it didn't mean we could still have a relationship, stating not now and perhaps never. She nodded through her tears, stating she understood and expressing how deeply sorry she was for everything. I told her I believed her, but added she had 18 years to think about why she did it, encouraging her to use that time to become a better person. When she tearfully asked if I would write to her, I told her I didn't know and said goodbye. I hung up and stood to leave. Behind the glass, Lauren sobbed, pressing her hand against the partition as I turned and walked away. Driving home that night, I passed Lawson Furniture Galleries, Riverside Park, where I taught Lauren to ride a bike, and the house where Evelyn and I raised our family. I realized my old life was completely gone, and everything I thought I knew about family, love, and trust had been shattered. But amid the ruins, something new was beginning to take root. The question was what I would build from the ashes, and time would give me that answer. Late December, 2025. A month had passed since the sentencing. I stood in my furniture store watching the cold December freezing rain fall on Main Street as pedestrians hurried past with umbrellas. The store was busy again with customers picking up last-minute holiday gifts. Marcus was helping a young couple, and Jennifer was wrapping gifts at the register. I felt different, not entirely healed yet, but steadier, as if I had finally found my footing after months of free fall. Dr. Campbell told me there is no finish line when it comes to healing, describing it as a journey taken one day at a time. I was still living in the house on Maple Street, but I had started looking for a smaller apartment downtown because the house held entirely too many memories. I wasn't ready to move just yet, but I knew the day was coming, likely after the new year. My routine had shifted. I woke up at 6, watched the sunrise over coffee, and walked to the store by 7:30, working until 5. I hit the gym on Mondays and Thursdays and saw Dr. Campbell for therapy on Tuesdays. On other nights, I had dinner with Patricia or David, or read in my living room, learning to view the quiet as peace rather than an old haunting. There was no dating. People had brought it up, especially Patricia, but thinking about that right now felt impossible. Maybe someday, but not now. The business stabilized faster than I expected. The community rallied around me, with people coming in specifically to shake my hand and tell me they admired what I did. Sales rebounded, and I even hired a new part-time employee named Kevin, a recent business graduate. I also started planning something new, hosting financial literacy workshops at the store, offering free monthly seminars on identifying fraud and protecting assets. If my ordeal could help even one person avoid what I went through, it would be worth it. Therapy continued every week. Dr. Campbell's office became the one place where I could say the things I couldn't utter anywhere else. During a session the week before Christmas, she noted I had made incredible progress in just a month, stating they were moving into the harder part now, the rebuilding. I admitted to her that I didn't know how to trust people anymore, explaining that every time I considered letting someone in, I remembered what happened. She spoke gently, telling me I didn't have to trust the way I used to, explaining I could learn to trust with wisdom, boundaries, and awareness, stating trust no longer meant blind faith, but an informed belief. I still had nightmares about Lauren standing over me, the car going off the road, and Evelyn's cold, distant face. But Dr. Campbell assured me that was normal and promised they would fade with time. Every Sunday I drove to Pinewood to have lunch with Raymond. The drive became a ritual, 45 minutes through the countryside to think and breathe. Raymond had aged visibly since the trial, his stress triggering a minor cardiac issue in early December, but he was back home and recovering slowly. Sitting by the fire one Sunday, he told me he was proud of me, and that my mother would be proud of me too. I thanked him, admitting some days were still incredibly hard. He told me there would always be hard days, but reminded me I was strong, just like Mildred. Family dinners resumed, usually small gatherings on Sunday evenings at Patricia's house, where we laughed, shared stories, and carefully avoided talking about the trial. Emma announced plans to start a blog focusing on raising awareness about financial fraud, inspired by what happened, and David and I grew closer than we had been in years. Drinking a beer one evening, he told me I was his hero. I shook my head, stating I wasn't a hero but just a survivor, and he replied that was exactly what made me one. Evelyn was living with her sister Diane, working part-time at a flower shop as part of her probation terms. She had sent me 2 letters over the past month, apologizing and asking if we could talk, but I didn't reply. James Anderson told me I didn't owe her anything and I wasn't ready. Maybe I never would be. I kept my promise to Melissa Brooks, establishing a $50,000 educational fund for Oliver's future tuition, helping her file for divorce, and securing a restraining order against Tyler. She told me I really didn't have to do that, but I insisted, stating Oliver was innocent and deserved a chance. Lauren remained at the county jail awaiting transfer to Cedar Mountain Correctional Facility, upstate. She had sent me 3 letters over the past month. I read the first 2, but couldn't bring myself to open the third, leaving it untouched on my kitchen counter. Dr. Campbell told me I would know when I was ready. Tyler was at a different facility awaiting transfer. His attorney had filed an appeal, but James assured me it wouldn't go anywhere, stating he would serve every year of his sentence. Good. I started accepting speaking invitations, small events for now, like talks at the Rotary Club and presentations at senior centers, about identifying manipulative behavior. People listened, and several shared their own stories of family betrayal and financial abuse. It felt like something meaningful, not a complete purpose yet, but a start. I recovered about $200,000 of the stolen funds through asset seizures, while the rest had vanished into offshore accounts. I accepted it with peace. The money didn't matter anymore. I had my store, my family, and my life. On December 26th, the day after Christmas, I drove to Evergreen Cemetery, where my mother was buried. The December air was freezing as I stood before her grave. I spoke softly, telling her it had been 5 weeks since the sentencing, and that I was doing okay. Not perfect, but okay. I placed a wreath of white roses, her favorite, on the headstone, stating I thought she would be proud of me because I survived and was still here. As I turned to leave, my phone vibrated with a text from Dr. Campbell. She informed me that Lauren's caseworker had reached out because Lauren wanted to do a restorative justice interview before her transfer. She explained it would be a professionally mediated therapeutic session focused on healing and accountability, noting it was scheduled for next week if I was interested, and asked if I was ready. I stared at the text, the cold wind biting at my face. It was a chance to face Lauren again, not in anger or in a courtroom, but in a controlled space designed for healing. Was I ready? I didn't know, but it was time to find out. December 28th, 2025. I sat in a small conference room at the Maple County Jail, hands clasped tightly in my lap, looking out a narrow window at the gray December sky. The room smelled of industrial cleaner and stale coffee. Dr. Campbell sat beside me. She spoke softly, telling me I didn't have to do this and stating no one would judge me if I walked away. Taking a deep breath, I told her I needed to, explaining it was for both of us. The door opened, and a guard escorted Lauren into the room. Behind her came Ms. Rebecca Harris, a licensed mediator specializing in restorative justice. She was in her early 50s with kind eyes and a calm, grounding presence. She thanked me for coming and laid out the ground rules, explaining there would be no interruptions, that we must speak from personal experience, actively listen, and understand that the goal was accountability rather than immediate reconciliation. I nodded, my throat tightening as Lauren sat across from me. She was thinner than I remembered, her hair tied back, her face completely pale without any makeup. She wore the Orange County jail jumpsuit. She had been locked up for 6 weeks, with 17 years and 10 months still ahead of her. Her eyes met mine, filled with a mix of fear, shame, and a flicker of hope as she quietly said, "Hello." I greeted her in return. Ms. Harris sat at the head of the table and asked if I wanted to start by telling Lauren how her actions had affected me. I looked at my daughter, the person who used to be my little girl, who now felt like a complete stranger. Speaking steadily, I told her she had tried to end my life 3 times. I explained that every day since, I had been wondering why, asking what I could have possibly done to make her want me gone. Lauren's face fell instantly as she wept, insisting she didn't hate me and never had. My voice cracked as I asked her why she did it then. Wiping away tears, she admitted she was greedy and stupid, wanting things she convinced herself she deserved. She explained Tyler made it look easy, making her believe I would never notice the missing funds and that it wasn't actually hurting anyone. Pausing, she admitted that was just a lie, she told herself, acknowledging she knew it was wrong, but simply didn't care enough to stop. I pointed out that when she sabotaged my car, loosened the bolts on the ladder, and put sedatives in my scotch, she knew she was trying to end my life. Her voice was barely audible as she admitted she knew, stating she hated herself for it every single day. Ms. Harris leaned forward, asking Lauren if she could help me understand her mindset at the time. Lauren took a shaky breath, explaining she always felt like she wasn't good enough, viewing my wife and me as having a perfect life while she felt invisible. She stated Tyler made her feel special, telling her they could have everything if they just reached out and took it. Looking at me through her tears, she admitted she convinced herself that I owed her, viewing it as compensation for all the years she felt like she was in second place. I stared at her in shock, telling her I loved her more than anything and explaining the store was simply my way of providing for her. She acknowledged that now, but explained that back then her mind twisted everything, admitting she turned me into the villain just to justify her actions. I felt a fracture open deep within myself. I asked if she understood what she had taken from me, explaining it wasn't just the money, but my ability to trust others, my marriage, the daughter I loved, and my peace of mind. Sobbing, she stated she knew and expressed how deeply sorry she was, lamenting that she couldn't undo any of it, though she wished she could. I told her an apology wasn't enough and never would be, but stated I needed to know if she would make a different choice if she could go back. Looking me straight in the eye, she insisted 1,000 times yes, stating she would leave Tyler, tell me about his plan, and choose me instead. I noted softly that she hadn't, adding that now we both had to live with the consequences. Silence filled the room. Lauren finally spoke up, asking if I forgave her. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and looked at her. I explained I was trying, stating I forgave the version of her that was manipulated by Tyler, but admitted I was still angry with the version who chose to participate and carry out the actions. When I asked if she understood, she nodded through her tears, stating she was angry with that version too. Dr. Campbell intervened, explaining that forgiveness isn't black and white, but a process, noting I was allowed to hold both compassion and anger at the same time. Lauren then asked if I thought we could ever rebuild our relationship after she got out. I considered it carefully, replying that I didn't know, pointing out that was at least 15 years away, and noting we would both be different people by then. She pointed out that I came today, suggesting that had to mean something. I explained it meant I still cared enough to try to understand, but clarified it didn't mean everything was fixed. I reminded her that trust has to be earned, stating she had destroyed every bit of trust I had in her. She whispered that she understood. Ms. Harris turned to Lauren, asking if there was anything she wanted to commit to move him forward. Lauren explained she had signed up for every program available, noting she was starting GED classes the following month, along with twice weekly therapy and vocational training. She added she was reading about taking accountability and changing behavioral patterns, looking at me and vowing to become someone I could be proud of, even if I wasn't there to see it. I told her to do it for herself, not for me. The interview lasted an hour and a half. When it ended, Lauren stood up slowly, thanking me for coming and acknowledging how difficult it must have been. I agreed that it was. She mentioned she needed to see me and hear my voice, asking if I would ever come back. I hesitated, suggesting we see where we both are in a year. She offered a sad but genuine smile, telling me she loved me. Tears finally slipped down my cheeks as I told her I loved her too, but added that love without trust isn't enough. She nodded, promising to earn it back before the guard escorted her out. As I watched her leave, a tension that had been gripping my chest for weeks finally loosened. On the drive home, Dr. Campbell asked how I was feeling. I told her I felt exhausted and sad, but also lighter, explaining it felt like closing a door that needed to be shut. She affirmed that was what healing looked like, noting I had faced the source of my pain and survived once again. On New Year's Eve, I stood in my living room watching fireworks burst in the distant night sky. At midnight, I raised a glass of water toward the window, offering a quiet toast to survival and rebuilding. The next morning, January 1st, 2026, I visited my mother's grave, placing a wreath of white roses on her headstone. I wished her a happy new year, whispering that I had made it through the hardest thing I had ever faced, but emphasizing that I was still here. Walking back to my car, I realized I had no idea what the future held. I didn't know if Lauren would truly change, if I would ever fully heal, or if I would ever learn to trust and find love again. But for the first time in months, I felt ready to face whatever came next, ready to rebuild, and ready to hope. Looking back on everything, I realized a family betrayal cuts deeper than any blade. When the people you love most turn into the ones who harm you worst, it shakes the very foundation of everything you believe in. My story, this painful chapter of grandfather's story that I've shared, taught me lessons I never wanted to learn. Don't make the same mistakes I did. Never ignore the warning signs just because you love someone, and never take trust for granted just because someone shares your blood. Protect yourself, even from those closest to you. Verify financial transactions, keep your documents secure, and if something feels off, investigate before it's too late. Betrayal within a family is far more common than we like to admit. These stories don't just belong to me, they belong to thousands who trusted blindly and paid the price. It can happen to anyone at any age. In my darkest moments, I turned to my faith, praying for strength, wisdom, and the capacity to forgive what seemed unforgivable. Faith didn't erase the pain, but it gave me the grace to keep moving forward. My personal belief is that forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It means refusing to let resentment ruin the rest of your life. Love your family, but love yourself enough to set boundaries. The stories we share matter because they are warnings wrapped in heartbreak, meant to protect the next person from falling into the same trap. If this story resonated with you, please leave a comment below to share your thoughts. Have you ever experienced a betrayal like this, and how did you heal? Subscribe to the channel for more stories, exploring the complex realities of family trust and survival, and share this video with someone who might need to hear it. Thank you for staying with me until the very end. I know it wasn't easy. Future stories may include fictional elements created for educational purposes. If that type of content isn't for you, feel free to explore other videos that better match your preferences.